What's going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool and in the same area as me. Everyone say hello to Christopher Moore. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. Thanks, Michael.
I'm loving those flowers behind the left. And I also like the bookshelf. Real quick, what's the first book that pops into your head from that shelf behind you?
A book called Blue, which is about the color blue that I bought for research for a book I wrote a few years ago called Soccer Blue.
It's about the color blue, how it affects you. I mean,
It's
how do you write a book
basically
about
the chemistry and history of the color blue. And I don't remember the author right now. It's a French guy.
Uh-huh. Well, that kind of goes back into, looking and doing research for this episode. I made the joke before the podcast, but, looking at your bibliographies, like looking at Bowie's discography, you're a guy who's kind of been writing books. I mean, it seems like every year-ish, you're kind of pumping one out, right?
About every year and a half, I think, is an average. Yeah.
Now, is that the kind of, are you the kind of dude who is it just a routine? I mean, it seems like if you're going to be doing that, it's maybe you're the kind of person who's boom, boom, boom. How do you go about pumping it out so consistently?
Well, it's less regular than you think. Like I have friends who are crime writers, and they have hard deadlines that they have to put out a book or two a year.
Yeah.
And, a lot of them, like some of them, it's always April, and, they spend 2 months going to Italy or something, and then they go do something else. And I'm not quite like that. I miss a lot of my deadlines. The way I had my contract set up was every 18 months.
Okay.
But some books take less than 18 months to write. If it's a sequel and it's an area that I'm familiar with, there doesn't need to be any research. So it's just the writing of the book. And sometimes books are shorter. So I have a couple of vampire titles that may have taken 6 to 9 months to write. Whereas then I have books that are big historical things like Lamb or Sacre Bleu, and those, took 3 years. And in fact, when I was writing Sacre Bleu, I wrote one of the vampire books while I was reaching Sacre Bleu.
Yeah, I mean, we talked to Mark Graney. He's the guy who does the Tom Clancy stuff now. And like he said, correct, I think he's doing 2 or 3 books at a time. It's almost like a 6-month cycle for those people.
Yeah, I think it just depends. I mean, I've often said that if I didn't write comedy, I could probably write faster.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it would be the opposite.
You'd think, but the thing is, it has to be funny. If it's just, if you write straight, say, thrillers, which is a good sort of mid-ground genre, if you're really good at outlining, then it's basically you put your time in, each scene accomplishes what you need each scene to do, moves the story in the way you need it to do, and then it's just sliding pieces around in your outline. But every day you can go, okay, I'm going to write 2 scenes a day, I'm going to write 2,000 words a day or whatever.
Yeah.
But with me, what I find is if I write it and it's not funny, I've wasted my time. And oftentimes I need to think about a scene to come up with what's going to be funny in it. So the only reason I would say that probably maintains is how few comic novelists there are.
You literally took the words out of my mouth. I lean towards the comedy side in my writing, and it's, especially, we're recording this in 2021 on 9/11 and from New York, 20-year anniversary. But it's amazing how the literary landscape these days, it's to find someone who's trying to be funny without, it goes back to really what I want to ask you is, when you started doing this, you're writing about drugs, you're writing about airplane crashes while getting fucked. I mean, you're doing all this stuff. Did you make a conscious decision early on to lean heavy into that? Is that your personality? I mean, we're just meeting for the first time. I don't really know you. Are you a guy who just likes to shoot the shit and just be laughing all the time?
Yeah. Do you mean to write comedy? Was that a decision?
Well, yeah. I mean, is it your personality? And if so, was it easy for it to come out in your art?
I think, when I first started going to writers' conferences in the early 80s, I thought I was a horror story writer. And I took my horror stories into workshops and I would read them and people would laugh at the way I turned a phrase. And I just thought, I guess that's what I do. and so you're right. I leaned hard into that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what I find funny and what other people find funny, we can have that's another discussion. But yeah, it's just something that I'm able to do that distinguishes me from the other 90 next writers that might be writing horror, or might be writing science fiction, or might be writing fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was just it I guess fits with my natural personality, and that people were laughing at my stuff before I knew I was writing comedy.
Yeah, and it seems to be like, going back to the beginning of it, the first book was Practical Demon Keeping, correct?
Right.
And that was 92. But before that, what was leading into that? I mean, had you had the idea of a long form fiction before, where you said writing workshop? How did you get into it to even like kind of begin with?
Well, I had been, I was a pretty good writer in high school.
Yeah.
And then I got, from a working class family in Ohio, and everything was like, your entire fate was based on were you working hard enough. I mean, I don't care if it was an earthquake, it was like, oh, you had an earthquake? Were you working hard enough?
Ohio's a wild place. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and my dad was a cop, and he was sort of raised with that same sort of work ethic. So I realized pretty early on I wasn't going to make a living like right out of high school as a writer.
Yeah.
And even if you go to college, undergrad, you're not going to, well, graduate level, you're not going to make a living as a writer. And so I picked something that seemed more practical but yet creative, which was photography. So that's what I came to California to study when I got out of high school, and failed miserably, dropped out of school. And I was selling insurance. And my girlfriend I was living with at the time in Santa Barbara said, oh, there's this thing, this writers conference. You said you used to write, you should go to that thing. Really? And I went, okay, I went. And I went to that thing, and I wrote, you had to write some stories to get into the conference to submit. And I wrote them, and people were sort of over the moon about them, the judges or whatever. And I got some positive reinforcement from the guy who worked the comedy workshop, a guy named Ian Bernard, who used to write for Laugh-In back in the 60s.
That was a separate workshop, a comedy workshop?
It was a comedy workshop in a writers conference.
Oh, cool.
And so you had like workshops pretty much all day, and then you had middle of the night workshops, pirate workshops, where you stayed till 2 or 3 in the morning reading your stories and learn. I learned a lot. It was a good experience for me. But that's where I think I went from a sort of this undefined, I don't know what I want to do, to this is what I seem to be good at.
Uh-huh.
And I had sort of cut my teeth on Ray Bradbury and Robert Bloch and Richard Matheson, all these guys that, most people know their stories because they were adapted for the Twilight Zone back in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was reading when I was a kid to get to what I would be writing. And but I realized very early on, like as soon as I decided, okay, I'm going to make another shot at it, you had to write novels.
And this is mid to late 80s?
This is mid to late 80s.
Uh-huh.
And there was no way you were going to make a living with short story. There's still no way you're going to make a living.
Never, no way. But I was going to ask, what was the scene like then? I mean, especially in Southern California, was it? You said Santa Barbara?
Yeah. Well, Santa Barbara was a tough place to be poor.
Still, things haven't changed.
Yeah, it was a tough place to be poor, and if I was gonna write, I was gonna have to, work in a job that maybe didn't pay as much but allowed me more freedom, and free mental time. I mean, selling insurance didn't involve as much actual time on the clock as it did anguish over whether you were going to fail or not. So, I did think I waited tables and worked in hotels at the desk and stuff like that. And I moved to Cambria out of Santa Barbara. But there wasn't a writing scene there. There was just everybody, anybody you knew that was trying to do something like that was working 5 jobs to make that happen. And Santa Barbara was a really expensive place to live. Like it would be to try to do that in the city now in San Francisco.
I own a dog walking business.
Oh, there you go. So what I mean about being on the hustle. And so anyway, I ended up in a little town on the Central Coast, and living in that little town where every tomorrow is like yesterday. and nothing ever seems to change. That's what set up writing Practical Demon Keeping.
Well, did you immediately fall in love with California when you came out here?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, even after I dropped out of college, my mother was like, "Oh, you had a job with a union and benefits. You need to come back." And I said, "Look, Mother, I would rather starve in California than own Ohio."
Yeah.
And that's maintained, for 40 something years now.
Yeah, similar. I mean, we're on again, I'm looking at your wiki and it seems like you and I are similar as in the sense of, 10 years ago, I was 23, 24, working in Fort Lee, New Jersey, right over the George Washington Bridge. I'm from northern New Jersey, where they filmed The Sopranos. And, I needed to get out. I joined a band. I moved to San Francisco. It was just, and the second I got here, I turned back east and I'm like, never again. It's just, as soon as I got here, it was immediate. But immediately you're drawn into it. You're living here. It seems to be right off the get-go. That's where you started writing, and that's where your books the universes began for you, right? I mean, you write about most.
Yeah. Well, you follow that old Hemingway adage, write what you know. But that also, you have to preclude. You also will learn stuff that you can write about. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're writing the same sort of Roman and Clef. You end up writing like John Cheever stuff. Like, this is my boring life that I can eloquently expound on, and that's not what I was interested in.
I was hoping you weren't going to say someone else, but we'll stick with Cheever. That's fine. I like.
Yeah,
that.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But also stuff that you're taught in MFA programs to write. Your first novel is always supposed to be autobiographical, and I think people can get in a rut. And my life wasn't interesting enough, to write about. I used up all the jobs I had ever done, which were a fair number of them, by my third book. And by my fourth book, I got to write about somebody who does something I haven't ever done before. So my main character is a pilot, and I learned to fly a little bit and hung around pilots, so I saw how they talk to each other and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's you are writing about your own life, but certainly I think most of the books are set in California.
Well, yeah. Let's not jump. I want to kind of go back to that first book. Who are you at that time? I mean, how long did that first I'm literally holding the first manuscript of my novel. It's done. But I wrote a novella 2 years ago, and that took about a year. But I've been writing this book for 4+ years. I mean, how long did that first book take? Was that a quick experience for you? I mean,
No. The biggest thing I had. I mean, this maybe speaks closer to where you are, or maybe a little bit behind where you were, is I turned 30 and just had a meltdown because I had never finished a book, and I had done all the sort of suffering you're supposed to do as a writer, and all the drama of it, and the substance abuse and all that, but I really hadn't gotten anything done. And so I realized, okay, I've got to, I just face planted on my whole life, and I decided, okay, I'm going to actually do what everybody's been telling me to do for the last 10 years, which is write every day, and not try to get a whole book done on Sunday night before it's due on Monday, that kind of thing, treat it like the term paper thing. So I wrote every day, and I lived in my friend's basement in a room that didn't have room for a desk. So I would get up and go to a diner, and I would write longhand in a notebook every day. And for, I think, a year, I wrote in a journal. Okay. And I had to write every day. It didn't have to be long. It didn't have to be good. And much of it, if I looked back on it, I'm sure was whining. But I was still a failure. But I did after I had done, and all that time, every day I was thinking about the book I was going to write. And if I would have an idea for the book, I would write it in the margins of that journal, I guess. So after a year, I went, okay, now I'm going to write the book. And I had the same rule about writing the book, is I would write every morning, first thing, get up, dress, go to the diner, drink coffee, and write. And I had a good relationship.
You were a scheduled kind of guy.
Everything else, I tried everything else, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And especially for knowing I had to do long form. I mean, you can be a great sprinter and you do these, maybe a brilliant short story, but then what? Then you've got to start over again, And so I knew my goal was to eventually make a living, and I was going to have to write novels. So That's how the schedule started, was writing every day. I wrote the entire book longhand, on like big chief pads. And I did not rewrite anything until I had a first draft.
That's what I was gonna say on that. For, and people who, this is what people want to know. That first draft, it was just get it on the paper, get it down. Once it's finished, I'll fuck with it later. That's how you thought of that first
Right,
draft.
right.
Yeah.
And I would continue to write it in the journal that I was telling you about, maybe less each day, but I would, and I would, if I had a note for rewrites for the book, I would put it in the margin of the journal and go, you've got to go back and change, Jeff's name to Bob or whatever, or, he has to be in this scene in this thing. But I didn't do it at that point because I had started several long works and I had these incredibly polished chapters 1 and 2 and never got to chapters 3 and 4. So I knew what I couldn't do. Or what wasn't going to work. And so I was trying something else, which was get a whole first draft. Yeah. I wouldn't look back more than half a page to see like, where does this scene start? And by I would say 3/4 of the book, I had forgotten some of the characters' last names. So I would put like Robert Line, and I'll look this up later. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was really an act of faith of so many teachers that had said, this is what you, and working novelists that said, this is what you have to do to get the work done. Yeah. And you have to get it done, get a draft and then rewrite. And otherwise, and the truth is, and this is now experience of having written a bunch of books, is you're going to rewrite that first or second chapter a bunch of times anyway. You're going to do things in chapter 30 that are going to make you have to go back and change stuff. So don't change it, on the third week you're working on the book, So that was how it happened. And I finished the book after, it took me a year to write the manuscript. And then I bought a computer, basically on credit, from the guy who had the diner that I wrote the book in. We become friends, He's like, well, I guess you're not going to go away. And he's
kind of computer.
It was like an IBM PC.
Okay.
With the two disk drives.
Yeah. Okay.
Weighed about 100 pounds. We're talking. This is about 1990, 1989, something like 1989, I guess. And I input the entire manuscript into the computer. That was the first rewrite.
When you physically typed it on.
Yeah. And that was the first rewrite. So that any of the scribbles and scratches and circles and arrows were gone, and now it was a manuscript.
Yeah.
And which used to take, this is like, let me tell you about walking to school in the snow, that kind of stuff. I know that's what this sounds like, but it would take like 8 hours to print out a 300-page manuscript. Oh, yeah. Because it was like on these daisy wheel printers.
Yeah.
And they had the tractor feed thing. And you go, okay, I'm going to start this out. And it sounded like a machine gun. It literally would vibrate itself off the end of the table it was on. It didn't have something there. And you go, man, I can't do it. I've got to go do something. So you'd like start it, and then you'd leave the house, and you'd come back expecting to have this. Okay, I'm going to have to separate all these pages and stuff.
Connected, yeah.
And you'd just type one line. The tractor feed had jammed, and you typed your entire book on one line. So you used all the ink, but you hadn't printed your manuscript. It was so you kind of had to babysit the printer, even though it was going to
put
take.
a fan on it, make sure it doesn't over. It's like a crap.
Oh, it was insane. I knew people that would they had a house with a balcony, and they would put the tractor feed out over the edge of the balcony and let it go down the other.
My father did that. My father was a computer programmer forever. And, growing up, I'm not a big computer guy, but he had it all, right? He had my house hooked up with everything.
Right.
And I remember the prints would get so long, he would put it out the window. You're totally right. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, because the mechanical part was what would break.
Yeah.
It wasn't, the computer wouldn't break. It was all the stuff moving the paper. And that maintained up until probably the early 2000s.
I was going to say late 90s. Yeah. Laser.
Yeah. You could, even when the first laser printers and stuff were shit.
Awful.
Yeah, they jammed all the time,
I'm to put in relate, I was born in 1987, but high school when my dad would get fucking pissed. I would print MapQuest directions, and those ink cartridges were a lot of money.
Right.
You know, I
Right.
mean, he would get pissed. All right, so you have this first book, this first manuscript. You're a 30-year-old, whatever, dude, maybe smoking weed, doing whatever you're doing. Where's the motivation? How do you even get that first book published?
Um, I did what, all the writers' guides say to do, the novel and short story writers' guides say to do. I wrote the query letter and started sending it out. And I was, living in my friend's basement, and his girlfriend was from LA.
Okay.
And her best friend would come and visit, and stay at the house. And she worked in development for CBS, I think.
Okay.
And so I said, and so she read for a living. It's the short of that. She read scripts for a living. And I said, look, would you read this? I don't need you to do anything with it. I just need to know if it blows dope.
Wow.
And she said, I'll when I can. And I said, cool, that's all I'm asking. I don't need you to, I'm not asking a favor except that read it and tell me if it's awful, because you just don't have any sense of it. And so, and it was a big deal because every time you do it, it's either that 8 hours of printing the manuscript, or it's like $40 to get it copied at the copy place. And that was a fortune at that point. So anyway, I gave it
real quick. Just, I want to ask you a quick question. You give her that manuscript. You're like, read it, whatever. In your mind, were you expecting it to suck? Were you expecting rejection all the way, or did you think you had something that was really awesome on your hands?
I didn't know. I thought I had done what I'd set out to do,
which was the main goal.
I finished a book. I'd written a funny horror story. I just didn't know whether it worked or what. And then while she was reading it, I was doing whatever rewrites I was doing from other people who were readers. I didn't give it to other writers. I gave it to like the kind of like your friends that read 3 books a week.
Yeah.
And I was like, just tell me if it stops you. If there's a point where you're reading it and it stops you. And if I got the same comment from 2 people, that needed to be fixed, right? So, and then about 6 months, this woman calls me back and she said, I read your novel. And I said, great. And she said, and there's 2 agents that want to represent you.
Oh, wow.
And she had sent it off to agents. And this is probably one of the most difficult things I ever did. Is the first guy in New York that accepted me said, we had a call and he goes, well, the book is good, but everybody's too nice. The monsters are too nice. You've got to make them meaner, and you've got to cut. There's too many monsters because there's a genie and there's a demon, and he's going. You got to get rid of one of those. And it was like kind of going through the list, and I go, you know what? And this really was like, I was looking at waiting tables forever. And that was not a bad job, but that wasn't what my goal was. But I go to the guy, I go, look, I appreciate the time you've taken on this and your comments, but I would rather die in obscurity than to make those changes, And I didn't feel like it was arrogant, because I felt like, anybody else that had made suggestions, if it resonated with me, and that maintains to this day. I mean, if my editor goes, you need to change this, if that, clicks in my mind, I go, yes, I do. But if it doesn't, then I don't do it. So anyway, that was the first agent that accepted me. I rejected, which was like, and then it's like hanging up the phone and going, well, that may have been the dumbest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
But it worked out, and somebody else picked it up, and then it sold. An agent in Hollywood that worked in a boutique agency, he sold it to Disney for a ton of money.
They had a publishing company?
It's for a film before it had ever been
Wow. Okay.
And and there were 2 other studios that were interested in it, and my agent called me at where I was waiting tables, and he goes, what is it? They'll give you $350,000, but you have to answer by 7:00 tonight, or it's going to go away. They're not going to let it go to the morning, because then Paramount and Warner are going to offer it, and they don't want to get in a bidding war. And I was like, I got garlic bread going down on people's life. I go, I can't talk, because that was before cell phone. So
That's
And
a
I
fucking
go,
dream come. That's a dream come true.
oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And I go, tell him you're authorized to close for 400 and you can't get a hold of me. And he goes, they'll never believe that. And I go, I got garlic bread on table 5. I got to take out, dude. The kitchen's calling me. So he calls me back and he goes, okay, they settled at 400. And I go, what'd you tell me? He goes, I told him that I was authorized to settle at 400, but I couldn't get hold of you. And I'm like, what am I paying you for? You know,
I was gonna say, yeah, isn't that his job?
Yeah, but I mean, he did a great job. I don't want to diss the guy. I mean, it was he took a waiter from being a waiter into being a professional writer in like a matter of 15 minutes. So that was
so that pops, that happens. You know, now you're a young dude with a whole bunch of cash and stuff like that. How do you stay motivated? What's the next thing? I mean, at that time, do you quit that job that night, go home, buy a 5th of Beefeater, and just like get to it? I mean, what did you do?
I did. You know what? That's your first instinct is like, I could get a rock of cocaine the size of a Volkswagen. You know? No, I did. The thing about having some success I was 33 at that point. You know, I was 30 when I started that project. I was 33 when it sold. And you have read every story about everybody that went to Hollywood, had one deal, bought a Porsche, ended up living in the valley, in somebody's back room, and they just had done the full loop in a matter of time. So that wasn't what was going to happen. That money had basically put me where I would have been if I had been working a career type job like everybody else instead of living on a subsistence level. And so I just knew I had to write another book. And that was the thing. And I had my New York agent goes, Disney offered me a screenwriting deal. And it was basically like an open, you pick an idea, we'll pick an idea, you write 2 screenplays for us, we'll pay you X amount of money. And I hated driving in LA. It was just terrifying. You
were still living outside of Santa Barbara?
Yeah, I was living up in a little town on the central coast of California. And I had this 280Z Nissan that
my dad had one, 280ZX.
Yeah, I am your dad. It's clear that I am your dad.
Old T-top.
Yeah, this one, and it leaked fumes. Yeah, this leaked fumes. So I couldn't even take it to LA for my Disney meetings. I had to fly down because I would have been asphyxiated.
Yeah.
And anyway, so it was nightmarish, and I knew I didn't want to live in LA, and I would have had to do that to do the screenplay job. And so my New York agent goes, "You got to decide whether you're a novelist or a screenwriter." And I go, "I guess I've got to write another book."
Okay.
And when I was doing my research for the Demon book, he kept saying, "See Trickster, see Trickster." And so I would and these are real books. I'm going, there's no internet at that point.
Yeah.
And I'm flipping to, the Trickster part. And I'm like, this is interesting, and you're reading about Coyote and Loki and Anansi and all these different tricksters from different, different cultures. And I thought, well, I'll write about, that's my next book, and I sort of, without a contract or anything, I did a second book on spec. It ended up being Coyote Blue. I went and lived on the Crow Reservation for a while. No idea what I was doing. Had no basis. I've been like an anthro major at Ohio State.
Were you a personal question? Are you married at this time? Single person?
No. I was single. It was funny. The girl I was living with, the day I found out about the deal.
Yeah.
My best friend at the time, the guy whose basement I used to live in, he said, "I got to come over and talk to you." And I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "Your girlfriend, when you're at work at night, she's going out with another guy."
No shit, really?
Yeah. And I'm like, "Oh, well, she's going to be really sad because I just got this deal from Disney, yada, yada." So, but it was like, so it was like a really good news, bad news scenario. So it was real on all fronts. It was completely starting over.
Yeah.
I did buy a nice fast car. But the rest, other than that, it was just sort of getting myself back to zero with everybody else my age.
Interesting. Well, but at that time too, I'm pretty much just the stuff I was reading at that age. Were there any other contemporaries of yours doing the same thing? And you're gonna say probably no, but immediately Goosebumps comes to mind because when I was a kid, that was the big thing. And when you go into the horror kind of side of it, that's what I read as a younger kid at that time. But was anyone doing what you were doing?
No,
No, there weren't.
no,
Right?
no. And in fact, I remember sitting with a friend who was a writer and going, I want to do for horror what Douglas Adams did for science fiction.
Oh, wow.
And so that was sort of my model. And the only person that was writing like funny thrillers was Carl Hyacin, and he had two or three books out. And he's out of South Florida, and he just writes. They're realistic. They don't have a fantasy element like my stuff does,
Yeah.
but they were thrillers that were pretty funny.
Yeah.
And he actually kind of started a whole South Florida crime comedy genre within himself,
Yeah.
So good on him. But really, my model was Douglas Adams,
Uh-huh.
and saying, okay, I'm gonna try and do for the horror genre what he did for science fiction.
And
But there was I don't think there was Goosebumps yet, or if there was, I wasn't aware of it at that
okay,
point.
yeah. I mean, well, the Goosebump thing, yeah, you could prove me wrong on that. I don't know if that would be the same time, but yeah. And then, so you have at that time, it seems like you want to lean into comedy. You kind of know you want to lean into this horror kind of thing. Did you also know at that time when you're building these first two novels that characters are going to make their way through other things? And did you have a whole web kind of planned out? Did you even know the end of the second book?
No, I had no idea. I had no idea. In fact, and that's something that maybe your listeners will know this, but I have characters that just pop up from story to story with no sort of logic other than, oh well, yeah, geographically that works. And that was just basically at request. I mean, by the time I was one of the first non-tech authors to have my email on my books.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so I would get, because they weren't touring me nationally for my first 4 books, I think.
This is the publisher?
Yeah, and so I put my email on it, and then people would email me. And it was like AOL and CompuServe were that was the internet at that point.
Yeah.
And so I would get requests, and people would go, oh, we want to see more of this character and more of that character. So I would write them in to another book, which was great fun, except later on, I would find, as we get into the late 90s and the O's, and films are buying my, film companies are trying to buy my stuff, they're going, oh, no, Disney owns that character.
Really? From the past works, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So even though, so even though a character might only appear for one scene in a new book, the film companies were terrified of Disney. And
Is
they're
that
like,
a wild
nope.
thing as an author being told that you can't use your own character
For
contractual reasons? That's fucking
It
unbelievable. Well, I mean, there's so many. The more of these podcasts I do, there's so many parallels between the publishing world and the major record label world,
right.
and how at the end of the day, it really is all about that bottom line, and how many musicians have been screwed out of their own songs. I mean, it's just
Yeah. I mean, Disney. I mean, they paid me a ton of money. They made me.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I knew. I just didn't anticipate that it was going to affect me later on. I was writing for my audience and going, they'll think this is cool. They'll go, oh, this is so cool. I know this guy. And then as it moved forward, it became really problematic.
That's crazy.
And and you don't plan your career out. You're going, man, I hope I get this. I hope I can make this happen. And you make it happen, and then you write something that's interesting. And then, a lot of writers, if they're just going to be novelists, especially if they're interested in genre fiction, science fiction, fantasy, romance, crime, whatever, they'll take a contract right off the bat for like 5 books. And I'm so glad I didn't do that, because I had so much more freedom. And, I didn't have a deadline on that second book. I set my own personal deadline now, knowing how long it took me to do the first one, but I didn't set a deadline for the second one. And then after that one, I did have a deadline because I had a 2-book contract. And then since then I've, signed 4-book contracts. But you just don't plan your career. You're just doing, I mean, you really, for me, being a novelist, the coolest thing is I can go write a book about what I find interesting. And if I don't know anything about it, by the time I'm done, I'm going to know a lot.
Yeah, the book. I mean, again, in doing research for this, I'm going through stuff, and the book that I have to I have to get is the Island of the Sequin Love Nun. And on your website, it's cool because you do the first chapter, and you can roll your eyes. But I'm just gonna read something you wrote real quick because I think
Okay.
it still I think it still makes a lot of. But in that first chapter of that book, there's this line. It's the drunk guy at the bar. Success in America doesn't require any special talent or any kind of extra effort. You just have to be consistent and not fuck up. That's how most people fail. They can't stand the pressure of getting what they want. So when they see that they are getting close, they engineer some sort of fuck up to undermine their success. And to me, that and immediately just hit me. And it seems like in your writing, you're trying to tell people maybe not autobiographically what's going on with you, but I mean that how many people in my life I know that were scared of something they were doing and then just I was about to say some names, but yeah, and just fuck it up on purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, is that deep within you, that kind of stuff when it comes out on the page? Do you look at something like that and you're like, I fucking nailed that? I mean,
Uh, probably that scene. I think that's like a salesman in a bar who's lecturing a guy who is about to completely face plant for his entire life. I mean, he's about to crash literally. And I mean, there's a sort of, again, this speaks to, I'm not writing this when I'm 19, or 22 when I'm older. Yeah, I'm not. I've already fucked up pretty well in my own life. And so I'm speaking to my own experience. Yeah. And saying, this is my observation is that, and also being aware, I can't fuck up. Yeah. This is, this career thing will be okay, but I've got to keep trying. I've got to keep plugging. I've got to keep putting the pages down. Because writing in that diner worked, I wrote my next 2 books in that diner. Yeah. I had a house and stuff at that point, but I was like, nope, I'm not going to fuck with success.
Well, okay. Let me ask you a question then. Are you the kind of person did you feel like you couldn't write anywhere else other than that diner?
No, it was just something that, holy shit, there's an aircraft carrier and a helicopter about to land on it right here. Let me show you this. Can you see that? There's a helicopter right over the deck of the aircraft carrier, and there's a bunch of guys standing on those white dots are guys. That's crazy. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Sorry. Didn't mean to be distracted, but no worries. Baby threw that shit at me. No worries. It must be a 9/11 thing. That's not a normal.
I think so. Yeah. We are. For people who don't know, we're recording the 20th anniversary. I'll ask the question, where were you on 9/11?
I was at home in Cambria still. I've never seen a helicopter in person hovering over an air. Sorry.
No worries.
Shiny. And all those white dots are sailors standing on the deck of that aircraft carrier to the bay.
For people who don't know, Chris Trev has a fantastic view in a beautiful city like San Francisco. So
yeah, I wasn't. Yeah. If we're doing this on audio. It's all good. He's making shit up. It's all good. Anyway, sorry, I was distracted. No worries. I was in Cambria at the time, and I had constructed this nap closet where I would go and I could, I had a futon in there. I would shut the door and there was no noise. It was right in the center of the house because I was often up late at night. And my girlfriend comes down and goes, "You got to wake up. There's some stuff happening, And I was like, "Oh, okay." So that was where I was at home in California on 9/11. There was not even I knew people that were in the city in San Francisco at the time, and they were like, my daughter worked at the Transamerica Pyramid, and I was freaked out. I was worried somebody was going to hit the bridge, because there was all these iconic landmarks that people were terrified were going to be hit, but I was sort of like, nobody cares about where I'm at. I'm fine, I mean, I was horrified at what was going on. But it wasn't a personal safety thing for me.
Yeah, I was a freshman in high school, 20 minutes west of the Twin Towers. So I'm from Cat. My dad worked in the towers from 1990 to 2000 on the 8th floor. So I was on the top of that building multiple times. But I mean, that was I was 14 years old at that time, and I mean, we don't have to go down the 9/11 rabbit hole.
Well, do you think that? Huh?
I mean, I was a kid, my parents are from the Bronx. I grew up in North Jersey, Queens. I was in Manhattan 3 times a week starting at the age of like 5.
Right.
So that totally changed my life in a way, in the sense of going to concerts. I was starting to go to concerts in New York City. I remember going to a concert 3 weeks after, and it was just, everything was different. It was just totally different, and to last that for a long time, pretty much all my high school years, it was kind of like, they were still rebuilding it. The fence was around ground zero. No one kind of knew what would happen with it.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah, well, I guess we brought that up because today is 9/11. But yeah, to go back to, well, it's all good. To go back to that line, but yeah, you could not have, I feel like you could not have written that as a 19-year-old college kid. And if you did,
No,
it wouldn't have been believable.
no, and but that's what you do. I mean, when you hear that adage, write what you know. I mean, you just have to figure out, what do I know?
Yeah.
What do I know? And it doesn't mean I have to know how to necessarily, bake bread or, hook railroad cars together, whatever you're writing about. But you have to sort of take your observations from the rest of your life and bring it to your work. And I'm not writing, philosophical tomes where it can all be subtext. And there's subtext to that book. That book is basically about a guy who's a womanizer and basically kind of living off of his looks. And he gets that turned on him. The whole book is, it's completely turned on him. And the interesting thing about that is I just had a network really interested in making into a series. And I kept going, yeah, whatever. And they would call me back and they'd go, we're going to do this. And we're changing, because it takes place on Pacific Islands. So there's a lot of indigenous people in it.
And you traveled to Micronesia, right? To write
that? Yeah. I spent a couple months in Micronesia.
Yeah.
But they kept changing stuff to get around, making fun of indigenous people and all this. And when they finally they go, but we can't get past how he treats women.
You're saying the publisher?
No, the network. It was a TV network.
Okay. Well, that was the original. I wanted to ask that question. Do you ever get pushback from this stuff? I mean, you write some pretty crazy stuff. Even early on, did anyone ever try to be like, hey, Chris, I don't know, you shouldn't do that? Or
no, not in books. No, I mean, it's now my friends who write young adult stuff, they're up against that, and they do have people who are always saying, you can't say this, you can't. It has to be sensitive in all the ways that everybody has to be sensitive.
There's a trans character in that book, right? There's a trans.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
the 90s. Yeah, I was writing trans characters 30 years ago.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I wasn't being hyper hands-off sensitive about it. I was doing it for fun.
Yeah, totally.
But the thing is, I mean, I don't know that I could get away with, like, for my second book is about Native Americans.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could get away with that now. Just because I'm a white guy, and I'm not complaining about it. It's just the way it is what it is.
Yeah, no, totally.
And as I said, I was an anthro student. So looking at other cultures and sort of finding out how they work, that's what fascinated me. And so I don't know now if I could write about that, as because people, Anglo writers take shit if they try to write about people of color. I don't know. I mean, I haven't had that yet, but I tell my wife like every day, oh yeah, I'm going to get canceled. It's just a matter of time. Every time somebody gets canceled, I go, it's just a matter of time.
And that's why I was asking back then if there was even any resistance back then, because I'm a straight white male who's going to try to get his first book published in the year of 2021. I mean, to say that the odds are against me I could see the dark clouds forming already in the sky. So it's not favorable. But back then, yeah, I was curious if there was any kind of resistance to writing these kind of characters, or kind of just doing what you wanted.
No, I would, if I would get resistance from an editor, it would be at a very personal level. And by that, I mean, like I had one woman for the book that you were just talking about, Island of the Sequin Love Note. There's a woman in there who's like a villain, and she is all about expensive shoes. And there's a point where I talk about
spoilers.
Yeah, and it's not a big deal. but there's a point where I mentioned that she's wearing $500 shoes.
Yeah.
And my editor in New York at the time was a woman, and she wrote on the I mean, this is like the only note she gives me on a 400-page manuscript. She's like, I just don't think anybody wears $500 shoes. Yeah. I don't give a shit. And I called my mom, who was also a shoe whore, back in Ohio, and I go, Mom, is there such a thing as $500 shoes? And she's like, yeah, Ferragamo $500 alligator pumps. That's slam dunk. And I'm like, okay, I can win this, or I can just change the number or make it like hundreds of dollars, and then everybody's happy. So, but that's the kind of thing. I mean, I had one editor, like in my first vampire book, there's a poodle that gets slaughtered with one of the people. And there's like 20 murders in that book, but he's like really, really upset that the dog got killed. And I'm like, okay, fine.
You ever see I Am Legend, the Will Smith movie?
Yeah.
When the dog gets, spoiler alert, when the dog gets killed, that's the only time in the movie I was in the theater and everyone in the movie theater was just like, oh, like it was the worst thing imaginable. I mean, thousands of people have been killed before in the movie.
Right. Well, and this wasn't even a dog that was like, we never even met this dog. This dog entered dead. He was dead when the story started. Yeah. But Tom Hanks used to talk. He did a movie years ago called Tuna and Hooch, and they killed the dog. And then when he was doing the press junket, he was like, this is what I learned. Never kill the dog.
Don't do it.
But the point being was that he didn't go in and go, okay, you've murdered 20 people or any of this, or you had a trans character that's portrayed, unflatteringly or something like that. It was like, I hate that you killed the dog. And I'm like, whatever. So that was the kind of pushback I got early years on. It was always very personal. You could always see where it was coming from. Yeah. It wasn't quote editorial. It was, that bothered me. And I'm like, okay, I don't know now. I mean, I've been working with the same editor since 2000.
Okay.
So, and she worked with like Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov and a whole different generation of, I mean, she was the sweet young thing out of.
Imagine those early drafts.
Yeah. And but I'm sure, I mean, Ray Bradbury used to just go on TV and talk about, it's fine to grab women's asses, It was
wild. Yeah. I mean, my favorite author is Philip Roth. And I'm a Jersey dude I'm a Jewish guy from North Jersey. Philip Roth always spoke to me. But I mean, in today's world, no. Philip Roth.
No. Wasn't there a book that just slaughtered him? I mean, just came out.
So this is so I'm wearing my Green Apple book shirt. This is the first edition, and then the author. As soon as the book came out, some awful stuff was released about the author. So now this book, this 800-page, really well-written book, you can't have this anymore. It's gone. Like this, they're burning the books. It's no more. I think they took it out of print. But Philip, it's wild to think that those guys existed in that time or were able to write about the way they lived. And, you write about drugs and stuff like that. I mean, nowadays it's, we live in San Francisco. I can buy weed a block away. But back then, was there any kind of stigma about writing about drugs and stuff like that?
No.
No.
I mean, I never heard about any of that.
Yeah.
I really didn't. And part of the reason I wrote about it in my kind of local California books was because I saw it.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a period of the year in the little town I used to live in. It was like everybody's car repairs was being paid for with bags of shake, and it's like, well, those brake pads are going to cost you $150 or here's a grocery bag full of weed, exactly. With a street value of over $3. And that was, so I was just writing again about about an aspect of that small town culture that I didn't think other people knew and I thought was funny.
Okay. So going forward, I mean, the first book I ever saw of yours, and it's funny, and this is the next question I kind of want to get into, is the artwork of your books. The first book I saw, I brought it up, but Dirty Job. And I remember I was in the public library. It was like at that time, it must have been like 19 or something, but like I was in a depressed part of my life as a young kid. And I would I would get stoned. I'd go to the library and I would just, whatever book's spine was able to pop out of me, I would just grab it. And I remember grabbing that book because you're the kind of guy, you're the dude, like you're the fish of authors. Like you're always in every bookstore. Every bookstore I go to, one of your books is going to be there. Everyone kind of knows your name, but they don't know your writing, but they also really know the artwork. I love all the artwork in your stuff. Early on, did you have any kind of say in that? Do you work with the same artist throughout all this?
No, not at all. For years, I had no say at all in
Okay.
the covers, none at all.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they just found somebody that did a great job. Some cases, not so much.
Yeah.
And those haven't survived so much. And then I had an artist who was hired by the company, the publisher, to do my second book, Coyote Blue, and I really liked the hardcover of that. And it didn't get a big printing or anything like that. But when my later publisher, Avon HarperCollins, was going to put all my books out in reprint, this is about 2000, 2002, something like that. I said, go get that woman and have her do all the covers. And she did. And some things she did a great job, and some things she didn't.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, we're working on the cover of my new book now. And there's a lot, I have a lot of input now. You know, I get to work like kind of as the art. You have a
Reba, my dog, has made her appearance. There's a great new dog park I take her to on 36th and Fulton, fenced in dog park. So she had hello, Reba. This is her.
Hey, kid.
Yeah, she's a tired little girl. Hi, sweet. Do you have a dog?
I do not.
Okay. No pet.
What kind of dog is she? Is she a bulldog?
She's a mini English bulldog. So she's a mutt. She knows we're talking about her. She's got mostly English bulldog, but a little bit of beagle. Here, I'll show you her face. She's fucking adorable.
She is. She's gorgeous.
A good dog, but she's good because I own the dog walking business, Rough Paws, and she's able to go out and do her
nice thing. Yeah, she's the go-between, your translator.
Yeah. So all right, so that with the artists, it was kind of because I thought there was a theme, maybe, and maybe I'm wrong with that, but it always seemed like there was a theme with the art, especially in the books later on in like the mid 2000s.
Well, I mean, the guy that did Dirty Job, the cover for Dirty Job, I mean, he came up with that on his own, and he did a terrific job. And some of the motifs in it, like the little baby skull with the bow, I found out later that he sort of swiped that out of goth stuff, goth culture. But overall, that graphic, that was a great cover. And so we went with stuff that he did later on. But you know, sometimes you get somebody that works really well, and then they submit something and it just doesn't work, and you go, no, I'm looking for something completely different. And I don't even know. I couldn't tell you the name of the artist who's done my last 5 books, maybe.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, no. Well, I mean, you ever see Spinal Tap?
Oh, with the Stonehenge that's 18 inches tall,
or The Smell of the Glove, you know, where they had to change the cover of the album because they had a woman in a dog collar smelling a glove. Yeah. So it's, you know, book, especially nowadays, the covers, they're just so there's not a lot. They all look kind of exactly the same to me. You know, there's not a lot of. There's so much physical space to do some fantastic artwork, and I feel like novels really kind of dropped the ball on that.
Well, you know, one of the things that I really worked hard at, Michael, for years was to get noticed, and that's why I had titles like Island of the Secret Love Nut and Practical Demon Keeping and stuff. You know, stuff that we just like. If you were walking by, you go, "What?"
Even if it's
that's all I wanted you to do. And I look at covers the same way, but now there's very little merchandise. And then by merchandising, I mean, there's very little of the book in the store grabbing your attention. It's done online, you know, and you already know what you're looking for when you find it. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? You know, and so those authors that are trademarked, like, you know, Harlan Coben and James Patterson and all those, you know, the perpetual bestseller guys, their name is all they need on that cover.
Yeah, no, it's like a record logo. It's the same.
Yeah. And so And I actually have fought to have my name smaller.
I was going to say, yeah, because you kind of have that too, right? For the most part, it's pretty much the same. I mean,
Yeah, but since I write stuff that's so different,
yeah,
the cover needs to represent that. I mean, like I've just written 2 books set in 1947 San Francisco, and they're sort of on the noir motif, and so those covers had to look completely different from
totally.
Stuff that I'd written that was set in Paris in 1891 and stuff like that.
When did you move to San Francisco?
I could afford to. I mean, by the time I had moved to Hawaii and lived on the North Shore of Kauai for 3 years because I, always wanted to live on a tropical island.
And just cut you a check, yeah.
And it was like, oh, this isn't it's really far.
Yeah.
And it's often hot. And by that time I had been touring nationally.
Oh, cool.
So I knew I've been in every city in the United States.
Did you like that experience touring?
Yeah, I like it a lot. The travel is brutal, but the meeting people is really fun, and you get to see all these cities you'd never see otherwise, And I basically was at that point where I could live anywhere I wanted to. Yeah. And this is where I wanted to live. Yeah. And which is, I mean, just to step outside for a little, since we both live here, and trying to convey to someone who is, say, still in North Jersey or still in Ohio, is when they try to tell you about people who are dissatisfied and they're mad at the school board or whatever, and it's like, you know what you don't have in San Francisco? People who don't want to be here. Mm-hmm. We all want to be here. And for California at large, I mean, this, you've lived out here. You can always ask someone, where are you from? If you're in Mansfield, Ohio, you don't ask somebody where they're from. They're from Mansfield, Ohio. Otherwise, they would be somewhere else.
You ask them which Burger King do they go to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This is one of the few places that, everyone who's here. And I mean, again, the view outside, I look at this view all day and it's out of this world. But you're also, to my knowledge, one of the few authors who writes about San Francisco, or sets their books in San Francisco. It's easy to write about New York or Chicago or LA, but I mean, you correct me, but I can't. What book I just read that was based in SF? 2 books, because Tales of the City, I read that for the first time, which I loved. I love that book. That's just a quick, talk about funny too. Quick bang. I mean, but also the autobiography of a brown buffalo. Have you ever heard of that book?
I haven't.
Hunter S. Thompson.
Sure.
In Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, when Benicio del Toro's character, that guy, he wrote a
book. Yeah.
Takes place in SF, and it's just about him doing drugs, and he's like a Chicano lawyer, 1972 SF. It's a wild read. Read. Yeah, but so you talk about writing about what you know. SF must be a blast to write in. I mean, it's what a great place to set characters.
Yeah. I mean, and as I write about different periods historically in San Francisco, I've been writing, as I said, about 1947. What was going on culturally in the city was amazing in 1947.
Post-war.
You had all these the African American population went up 700% in the years of World War II. People coming here from the South to work in the shipyards. Yeah. And the Japanese population was shipped off to camps. Mm-hmm. So when they came home, there were Black people living in their houses. So you had this sort of immigrant Japanese culture meeting jazz culture in the late 40s and 50s. And you had this weird Asian sympathy with Chinatown, but it was still against the law to be Chinese up until 1943. So, and I've always lived a few blocks out of Chinatown, and I always felt like, well, need to get the passport because I'm walking to the store today. Yeah. And I like that. I like that. I feel like I'm going through a foreign country when I'm going through Chinatown. And the various, the mission, is not so Spanish now, but it was when I came here 15 years ago. It was.
Mission Street's still pretty. Oh, you came here 15. I came here 11 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's still. I mean, and all the art there is,
no, totally.
Dia de los Muertos. manhole covers are Day of the Dead. There's cool shit in the mission.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, there's great cultural things to write about. And you know, as you pointed out, it's easy on the eyes. It's hard to live. It's expensive to live here. You know, as you well know, as everybody knows, it's here. But I was just speaking sort of the culture at large, where they sort of do this sneery thing, and I don't get it, and yada yada yada. And it's like, well, first, it's gorgeous, and second, we all volunteered to be here.
Oh yeah.
You know, we didn't wake up here and go, "Oh my God, I hate this place. I've got to get out." You know, and maybe there are a lot of people that are like that. You know,
paradise.
Yeah.
It's paradise. I mean, I was just traveling. I just traveled up to Portland and Seattle 2 weeks ago, and you know, the thing about you hear about SF from people who have never been here, and B, people who have only been to Union Square is like, oh my God, so many homeless people. Yeah. I was in Portland, Oregon, and you can't even walk down a street. It's 10 cities. I mean, downtown Port, every single off ramp, on ramp into the city, just tent cities everywhere the eye can see.
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing the you know, the fiction that can get spun over time about a certain place that you never even been to. SF kind of always fall. It's just easy to do. The South Park did it. You know, they've always shit on SF. It's pretty easy to. But you're right. No one who lives here doesn't not want to be here.
Yeah, and well, it's the thing is, the last time I was in Paris, they were clearing out the tent city, you know, down by the I can't go Gare de. Anyway, the train station that's in the south of Paris. There was a huge tent city. You know, if you go to Calais in France, there's a huge tent city. I mean, miles of people. It's just that, you know, if you live in, you know, Sheep's Penis, Nebraska, you know, where anybody who's on the street is going to freeze to death. Yeah, it seems, you know, horrible, and it is horrible, and it should be solved. But it's you know, it's not the horror story that everybody thinks it is.
It's unbelievable, yeah.
And it's still, I address it in my first book in San Francisco. There's sort of a character based on Emperor Norton, who was declared, he went broke in San Francisco in the 1860s, and he declared himself emperor of Alta California and Mexico, and the protector of the people. And he was a homeless guy, and everybody was like, the difference was everybody went, okay, cool, sure.
Yeah. And which book was that?
That's Bloodsucking Fiends.
And that was your first SF book?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, because I needed to set a book in a city, and I knew San Francisco a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, but I came up here and stayed in a hotel, and I was terrified of cities because I grew up in, you know, small town in Ohio.
Yeah.
And so I would everything in that book takes place within one block of what used to be the 42 bus line, because I would get on the 42 bus. It was a big loop, and, you know, right outside of my motel, and I would get off and look at stuff, and then get back on the 42 bus and come back around.
With your little ticket. They're doing a free, I don't know if you've been, but there's a beautiful new art museum on Lower Haight, on Haight Street.
Oh yeah.
It might be the Haight Street Art Museum. They usually do like classic rock posters, but they just started a new exhibit. Some guy is doing the old Muni tickets, a huge free exhibit.
Oh wow!
Yeah, those the tearaway tickets. Yeah. So you you're on you said your 18th book, right?
Yeah.
What's next? I mean, what's life for you like nowadays? I mean, is it just you kicking back on your nice Eames chair, just chilling? I mean, I know you're pretty active on Twitter. I mean, you know, do you rage tweet from there?
When you finish I mean, still, even after 18 books, I mean,
I have an Eames chair too. Don't worry, it's right there. It is.
Oh, okay, cool.
Love them.
This was a birthday. This is a knockoff.
Mine was $400 off Craigslist, but people.
Yeah. My wife bought this for me for my birthday like 5 years ago. But every time somebody who decorates comes in, they go, "You want to get rid of the Eames chair?"
They're the best.
Yeah, they love it. They want it. Yeah, I'll keep the Eames if you want to get rid of the Eames chair. Anyway, and it looks good on podcasts.
That's what it's all about.
You know, when I'm working on a book, I'm really single-minded about it, and a lot of stuff falls by the wayside. You don't take care of life maintenance details and stuff like that. You know, everything from home repairs to renewing your driver license shit gets put to the side. So when I finish a book, and I just finished this a little over a month ago, then it's like, oh hell, I got all that stuff to do. And plus, in this case, we just kind of came out of COVID. So I not only had all the stuff doing my book, but all the stuff for almost 2 years that I didn't do because of COVID. So my life is like making appointments to go. Yeah, I haven't been to a doctor in 3 years, and I need to go to the dentist, and my glasses are scratched, and all this really boring life maintenance stuff. It's like, oh shit, the DMV says that I need to renew my driver's license, and oh yeah, my passport is up, and so it couldn't be any more boring. But that's what I'm doing.
Well, are you thinking about the next book? Are you
always? Yeah, and I don't know what the next book is. I mean, normally I do. Okay. And I just happen to be right now going, I have an idea, but I don't know that it's not something I've done before. And it's a big research project. So I'm not sure I want to do it. I'm really hoping that something will magically occur to me that'll be fun and somewhat different than something I've done before.
Do you enjoy writing?
I just rediscovered that. Yeah, I had a hard time during the last 5 years because I was pissed off all the time because of political stuff. And so I didn't enjoy writing as much. It seemed really a lot of work, but I was finishing this book, in June, July, a little bit of August, and I was like, this is kind of fun. I'm just writing dialogue between smart characters, and it was entertaining, and it was it was at the point of the book. The first part of the book, the first half of the book can be really miserable because you're just inventing a whole world. But once you get it up and running, then you just got to push the puppets around, and that can be really fun. And so yeah, I do like it. I like coming up with the ideas too. I mean, some of the funnest part of writing is just brainstorming, and thinking of funny shit, and you make a note and hope that it'll fit in something you're going to write later on, And that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to say maybe that's the research part of it. Do you enjoy the research you do into your book?
I do. I like the research part. I like going to places I'm going to write about. I almost always go to places that are set in my books. And that also, once I realized I'm going to be able to make a living at this, then you realize if I don't pick projects that would get me out looking at stuff and doing stuff, I'm going to sit in a room by myself making little clicky noises on a keyboard for the rest of my life. So you pick, projects that, like I've done a book on whale researchers, and I've got to go out with whale researchers, and be in the water with the humpback whales. And, I pick a project about, turn of the century art in Paris, and I get to live in Paris for 3 months and wander around Paris and look at art, which does not suck.
People can't smile on my face. I mean, it sounds like a dream.
Yeah. So basically it was, it makes the books more interesting. It makes them different, makes them less predictable. And I get to, look at stuff and see stuff, and so I've written books set in Venice, and I've written books set in Palestine, and I've written books set in Paris, and I've written, had scenes in London, and a whole book set in medieval England, and Crow Reservation in Montana, Micronesia, so, and that's largely just going, I don't want to sit in a room by myself and just there's going to be enough of that. It doesn't, if you write, you're going to spend enough time on your own, and that's okay. I'm fine being on my own.
Have you always been kind of a loner, or dude who can kind of just go out and blend into every kind of environment?
I am kind of a loner, and doing the research on books forces me out of my shell.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I was an only kid, so I was used to, I think maybe I ended up being a writer because I was home reading all the time to entertain myself.
Yeah.
And my dad was a big reader and always went to the library every week and even when I couldn't read yet, he brought me books home every week. Yeah. So that was sort of how I was programmed, and reading is basically a solitary thing.
Oh yeah. So 18 books in, I'm assuming, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a pretty vocal fan base. No, I mean, they're pretty in touch with you. I see that on Twitter, you're
back and forth with them. Yeah.
You're an engaging person. Do they give you shit anytime? I mean, do you ever listen to what they have to say? Are you in tune with what's going on with your readers?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the interactions are 99.9% positive and fun, and
but the 0.1% is what you remember.
Well, they're self-selecting. I mean, if they don't get it, then they're not engaging with me. Mm-hmm. It's like everybody always asks me my book Lamb, which is a gospel. It's about Jesus. They're like, didn't you get shit about that? I'm like, no, the people that wouldn't like it didn't read it.
Yeah.
And the people who read it liked it. And that's sort of maintained. So most of my interactions with my readers are pretty positive. Now that doesn't mean I don't interact on social media with people who are douchebags,
Totally,
as do we all. But no, and they usually have a pretty good sense of humor, and so they crack me up, and I'm happy to. And as I said, I do books by request. Enough of my people went. I had a character named Roberto, who was a fruit bat who could talk.
Well, that's from this book, right? From
Love them, yeah. And everybody's like, you got to bring back Roberto. You got to bring back Roberto. And I was like, I can't really think of another story. I was set in Micronesia, so I ended up. Roberto was in like my Christmas story set on the Central Coast of California.
Nice.
So he had a giant Micronesian fruit bat in California for Christmas, but my readers wanted that, so I put it in there.
Yeah.
So I have a positive interaction with my readers.
Love it. Well, Christopher, man, this has been an absolute blast. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of
my pleasure.
Yeah. So going forward, you taking off. Next book, where can people find you? You're mostly on Twitter, right? That's your main.
Well, I engage on Twitter. I don't engage on Facebook because it got a little bit too whiny.
Interesting.
And
on nextdoor.com or no?
No, I don't. No, mostly Twitter. I have an Instagram account with 5 followers. That I don't know who they are.
And what's the Twitter handle?
All one word, The Author Guy. It's at The Author Guy. But remember because there's another guy who's just Author Guy. Awesome. And he always gets and he's like, no, that's not me. But yeah, it's The Author Guy. And then
and you recommend
more.com will get you to any of those places.
Okay, because we'll include the links at the end of all this stuff. And Island of the Sequined Love Nun, is that a good place to start back up with maybe diving back into your catalog, you think?
Well, it sounds like you like that book, so yes.
Immediately, I mean, I saw the first anyone getting having sex in an airplane, I'm all for it. So,
you'll like that book. But
so you caught my attention with it. Christopher, thanks so much, man.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Enjoy your dogs.
Bye-bye.
Bye.